Evening. Hi, everyone, or morning, or afternoon, or wherever you are. My name is Brian Nord.
And I'm Eric Rojas, and thank you all for being here today.
Yes, if you're listening to this or someone forwarded to you, this is our fifth episode now, or sixth. This
Or
is episode number six of our
six.
YouTube channel, and this is about the theme of it is how did I get here? That's kind of the name of this series of conversations that we're having. If you're finding this content valuable, please subscribe and like this video on YouTube. It makes a difference when you do that. And if
Yeah, it
you
makes
hit
a
the
huge
little,
difference.
it really does. It does for us. But it gets, in the algorithm more so that the more people who hit like and subscribe, then that video shows up in other people's feeds. So it gets the conversations that we're having out. It makes it more wide and wide available. And
Mm.
also, and if you're new to YouTube, you may not know to do that. So if you're finding this valuable, please go out of your way. And you don't have to have your personal name does not have to show when you subscribe. You just put that in your settings on YouTube. And there's also a little notification bell. You see this little bell, and what that does is that when we release a new video, you'll get a notification on your YouTube. So it'll say ding, new episode, or we're going live in an hour. So if you want to stay abreast, or if we have like hot news and we do something outside of our normal Tuesday night time slot, you'll get notified. So you can do that as well. So that's a little YouTube tutorial for those who do not use YouTube. All right, good. Go ahead, Eric.
Okay, but first we'll do our little housekeeping item. This podcast and show is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of this podcast and show. It is not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay, Brian.
Okay, great. And a little background for those of you, this might be the first time you're hearing this topic being discussed. So, this is about in March. Uh, Ann L. Peterson wrote a book and published it called Is This a Cult? Confronting the line between transformation and exploitation. You can get the book on Amazon. It's like 15 bucks. It's a really easy read and it's very powerful. And the question really is what the book is. I mean, it's way more than this, but Anne, like myself, like Eric, and like our guest tonight, we're all people who spent years participating at Landmark and the work that was created by Werner Erhard. And when the pandemic hit and some different situations happened with Anne, she started to become awakened to like, wait, I know people have said Landmark's a little bit culty, or I know they say it's cultish, or I know people make jabs, but is this a cult? Like, what is a cult? And is it a cult? And we're not even having that conversation tonight about whether it's a cult or not. I have my own opinion about that the minute you start talking about cult, everybody goes crazy. And you can't have the real conversations, which are about what she's really pointing to, which is transformation, this line between transformation and exploitation and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Anne will be our guest live on Tuesday, July 9th from 8 p.m. at 8 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Pacific. That's in the US here. Please translate those are some of the time zones. That's just because I live in Central, Eric lives in Pacific. So I do that
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
So we know when things are.
Yeah.
Powerful. So our guest tonight, everyone, is Jennifer Clarke, and Jennifer Clarke was a staff member, and a self-expression leader, and she held many other accountabilities. I've known her. I was her center manager in Houston, and she lives in Austin, Texas. Since leaving Landmark, she's become a very successful person in human resources. and in talent acquisition. And she's a phenomenal human being who cares very deeply about this world working. So, with that said, here is Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
Hey, Jennifer.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, Jennifer,
Yeah.
what had you want to come on tonight?
Well, first of all, can I introduce myself a little bit?
You can do whatever you want.
Okay,
Sure.
okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my name is Jennifer Clarke. I am in Austin, Texas. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I identify as a heteronormative, cisgendered, able-bodied white woman. And it's important in this conversation for me that you know that that's my frame of reference, because I'm going to talk a lot about other points of view. And so I want to be responsible for that. I'm talking about them, but I am not in those points of view, right? So this is my perspective, and I just want to be responsible for that coming to talk with you. Okay, Brian, what was your question?
Well, first of all, is there anything else you want to say to introduce yourself?
No. I think you asked me like what had me want to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
What has you here?
What has me? So a couple of things. One is for me, this is a conversation whose time has come. Like I've been waiting 12 years to have this conversation in the public domain. And also like I've been gone for 12 years, but there are things that are still very present for me. One being the vision and the mission that I signed on for when I went on staff. And the other is like the great and profound love that I still have for the graduates.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that has not gone away, you know, whether they're graduates who've left or graduates who are still participating or graduates that I have a personal relationship with or graduates at large, like that love for what makes landmark education, it's actually the graduates, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say, no, you're doing great, and thank you. So, for those of you in the last 12 years, Landmark changed its name for like the sixth time to Landmark Worldwide, and so you might know that as Landmark Worldwide. And if you've never done the forum and you're curious about all this, or you have somebody who is participating, and you're watching this because you're like, what are they participating in? When she said graduate, she means somebody who's taken the programs. And in particular, I would say there's people who take the forum, and that's great. But then there's people who really fall in love with the whole message. And there's been thousands and thousands of them. I always say there's people who took the forum, and then there's people who really, they walk around and they're like, I'm a graduate. I did the forum. It changed my life, and I think it's a valid, incredible thing. And those people that I participated with for all those years, I also love very deeply. I love Landmark's one of those places where you meet just awesome people, and we talked about in our love bombing episode, but it is, you know, if in my criticism and opinion, if exploitation didn't happen down the line, Landmark's got one of the most solid support structure of awesome people. That's how I always felt in it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And we all still have friends and stuff that we met at Landmark, and we've met amazing people. So that's anyway. Sorry. So keep going, Jennifer.
All right. So I did the Landmark Forum in 1993 in Dallas. It was actually December, I think 10th, 11th, and 12th, 1993. I went straight into the Introduction Leaders Program, which was the leadership training and development program. While I was in that program, I did the advanced course and the self-expression and leadership program. So that completed the first curriculum. And when I came out of the leadership program, I moved to Detroit, Michigan to go on staff. And so from the time that I did the Landmark Forum until I went on staff, it was about 1.5 years. And I remember clearly, and I will probably tear up when I talk about it, I was in an evening session for the Landmark Forum. So that was the Tuesday night. And the forum leader was talking about this special course that they had that was a community landmark forum in an area called Highland Park. And it was a city that was completely surrounded by Detroit. And it was like a bolt of lightning went through me when I heard that. I literally heard a voice in my head say to me, I'm going to go there and I'm going to do that. And like probably 10 months later, I went on staff as a registration fulfillment manager in the Detroit Center. And I was one of the people that was accountable for the Highland Park Landmark Forum. And at that time, Highland Park was, I would say, probably 98% African American with 96% unemployment. And the mayor and his wife. So the mayor's wife was a designated seminar leader in the Detroit Center, and she worked with her husband and the city council to bring the Landmark Forum into that community to cause revitalization economically in that community, to get things started, because that city was about to go into receivership because they didn't have a tax base. So they brought the Landmark Forum there. There was a community of graduates that sourced and filled and staffed and took care of that particular course. And the Highland Park Landmark Forum was the first one of its kind. It was the first community landmark forum. And so I was actually in Detroit for 8 years. I wasn't on staff for 8 years, but I participated and assisted in and around that course every time they had it, and they had it twice a year. There were, so while I was on staff in that center, I was exposed. So I was from Fort Worth, Texas. I lived in Dallas for a year, and I moved to Detroit, Michigan. All right. And so Detroit, if you don't know, is much like New York, because when they closed the port in New York, all the immigrants came down the seaway into the next big port, and that was Detroit. So there are very large populations of very different ethnicities. So, for example, there's a very, very large Arab population there. It's the largest one outside of the Middle East, and that's in Dearborn and Dearborn Heights. There's a very large Jewish community. There's a very large Irish community. There's a very large Hispanic community, a Polish community. And so it's like Detroit is an amazing, amazing place to be. And it is where I grew up into myself. Like I was there from when I was probably 26 to 34. And I became like a person. I became a program leader. Like I really stepped into my own vision for myself and my life in that center. And one of the reasons that's so important is that I don't know the ratios, but my guess is that probably more than anywhere else, the Detroit Center has Black leadership. So when I was on staff there, I worked with 2 women of color. There were probably, out of 11 seminar leaders, 9 of the seminar leaders were people of color. The, self-expression leadership program leader, city coach was a woman of color. And so there was a very large and loud and proud and out in the universe experience of Detroit and the Detroit Center. And the opportunity to engage with people of color in really powerful leadership positions was available to me the whole time I was there. And so I really was mentored and trained and developed in all of the kind of nuances and subtleties around being in that community as a white person. And I didn't have the language for it then, but I do now. And I'm going to share more about that. But so I was on staff in Detroit. I was promoted. I left Detroit. I went to Houston. I was in Houston for about a year. I left Houston and I went to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, I was on staff, and the center manager was a friend of mine from Detroit. And she had been a Landmark Forum leader, also a woman of color. And my registration manager was a woman of color. And in both of those centers, the registration managers were people who could literally go like this and produce Landmark Forum registrations. They were magical. They were total rainmakers. Like they were
I work with someone like that. And, coincidentally, she was also a woman of color who grew up in the South, and I love her to death. Still keep in contact with her because she's just Yeah, there's something about that, right? Like the magic. They
Yeah.
always said that.
Well, and I think if I were to look at it, it's that there's a commitment to transformation, but there's also like a commitment to the community and being grounded in community and living from community. And that's not something that's in the white culture. Like, we're not community centric. We're very individualistic, right? So, and that's actually one of the tenets of white supremacy is individualism, right?
Mhm.
So the reason that I think it's so important to me for viewers to know that was my background and that was my experience is because that really informed what I did when I left Landmark Education. So during my tenure at Landmark, I was either a staff member, a program leader, a super graduate, right? Like, I would call myself a super consumer. I led seminars, I led the self-expression leadership program, I led the introduction leaders program, I led the team management leadership program, I led assisting introductions,
Did it all.
all the things, right? Like, I live in an out of area, so I kept the supplies in my apartment, things like that. Like, there were just, I had a home introduction box for if we were going to do an introduction at someone's house that I kept in my car, and I was, we passed that thing around. So I actually did a lot. And when I think back to those times, those were some of the best times of my whole life. I loved it. I loved being in the center. I loved the graduates. I loved the events. I loved the experience of myself as somebody mighty who could cause massive results. I loved leading programs. I was down for the cause, right? And Brian, you said, like, how did we get here? Like, I got there because I really believed in a world that worked for everyone with no one left out. And I still do. Right. So there was a world that works for everyone with no one left out, and the power and magic of transformation alive and real for all people. And I was 100% bought in for both.
Yeah.
Right. And I still am. I still am for a world that works for everyone with no one left out. And then there were the things I had to deal with to be able to be for a world that works for everyone with no one left out. And those were the things that slowly over time just kind of wore on me, right? Like the long hours, the low pay, the coaching that felt more like harassment, the expectation for me to be really public about things that I wasn't comfortable being public about. Like, my center manager always wanted to know who I was dating. And I'm like, well, if they're not a graduate, what does it matter? Well, you have a promise to be public when you're a staff member. And I'm like, okay, well, if it's a problem or a breakdown, I'll be public, but that's actually kind of a private thing for me, like, let me just kind of figure out what I'm doing first. And then when it's time to go public, I'll be public and share. But it was almost like there was this expectation that I was just going to lay all my laundry out for people to look at. And I was okay. And I was expected to be okay with that. So I'm trying to think of like where to kind of.
Well, first of all, what you said so far is really good. And that last point you made is very much in the culture. And I'm one of those people who would do exactly that, expect people to share, and did not even have an understanding of that I was crossing a boundary. I didn't even know what that was. And I think when you say that was expected, I'm not mad at myself about it. And I also shared things that I probably, as a more grown adult person, wouldn't do. But I just really want to underline that because I think it's really powerful in what you're saying.
There's a distinction to be an open, complete, and honest communication at all times.
Yeah. And to have your life be an expression of the values of Landmark Education.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you weren't out in life doing anything. If you ever got to leave the center and go be out in life, you weren't out in life doing anything that would reflect badly on Landmark Education, that your life had to be a living demonstration of the work, especially when you were a staff member.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So as I kind of progressed through my Landmark education, I started to notice like there were disconnects. And one of them was that it became clear to me that the people that were accountable for landmark education in the world headquarters office were very disconnected from what was actually happening on the court in the centers. Like they just weren't related to what the center staff were dealing with graduates, with finances, with resources, with the buildings. Like they just weren't dialed in to what was actually happening in the physical centers, you know? And it was everything from we used to have these boards up that had the mission and the vision, and all these different things, and they would be like broken. And so here we are, a world-class educational organization, and my boards are shattered, right? And I'm up there representing landmark education, and I'm sitting on a bar stool that spins around because it's not actually level, and there's no director's chair because it got taken for another program. It was just like this scarcity of things to actually have workability be present, saying that we're really committed to integrity. Right. And I dealt with that often. And then there were behaviors, like we've heard people share a lot of different things that didn't work in the centers. And I mean, I was screamed at, and I had a center manager call a graduate like a fucking bitch in the middle of the center because she couldn't make it to her assisting agreement on time because her car broke down on I-10 and she was stranded on the side of the road, things like that, where it's just like, this is inconsistent. Right. Like, And the second time, so I was on staff and then took a break and then was on staff again. So the second time I was on staff, I'd been out in the corporate world, and I was like, whoa, like not only do these practices not work, but there are some legal issues here, and we've got some like harassment things that could be happening. And like, there are some things going awry kind of in this situation. But even more than that, there was this experience I kept having of, we're actually selling that you can have anything you want for yourself or your life. That is literally what we're telling people. And yet somehow I am still dealing with the same thing over and over and over and over. That thing is not transforming. And the work that I'm doing, like trying to put a new context around it or trying to create a new possibility around it, isn't getting that thing resolved. It's just like smearing something on top of this unworkable thing and then soldiering on. Right? Like, one example is like being told over and over that I need to complete my relationship with my dad and that I need to have a loving relationship with my dad. And yet my dad did the landmark forum, but in the rest of his life, like he was still hurting my mom and my brother. Right? So it's like, I can create a possibility 10 ways till Sunday around that relationship, but there's an undeniable reality happening that's not working. And it's actually an integrity issue for me to pretend like it's okay. Yeah. And I've heard a lot from graduates about like there's this notion that if you're the graduate, you can bring possibility to anything. So like, for example, you can make any relationship work. Well, not necessarily. That is not necessarily the case. Yeah, you can get anything resolved in communication, right? You should be able to stay married to anyone. Like you should be like that. There is some way that you are supposed to be cause in the matter of workability in any situation. And if it doesn't work, the burden is on you. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of this magical thinking like, okay, I'm not causing the matter of a hurricane. Hurricanes happen.
We had a series of seminar leader weekends a few years back. And what they said, and I believe this was coming from Warner, what they said was that any unworkability in your life, any suffering, the source of it is you are incomplete with one of your parents. So that notion, that's not just a notion, that's the teaching, and that's in the forum. They don't say it as directly as that, but there is this idea that my inability, like I really thought something was wrong with me that I wasn't in a relationship. Like I just couldn't pull it off. Um, but in reality, I was working 70 hours a week and assisting on top of that. So that doesn't really leave you much room for a relationship. But I didn't think that was the problem because see, that's a circumstance, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I figured I was the problem. So, and then I think, oh, well, this is an area I've been suffering over. So where am I incomplete with my parents? I didn't need to do any of that. I mean, what gets you a relationship is dating people, meeting people, spending time with them. Like that's how you get one going. But that never occurred because what you're saying is so true. And just
Mhm.
underlining it is that that's an actual, very real thing you're pointing to is that there's direct coaching about going back to people that you are quote unquote incomplete with.
Yeah.
And some people do get a graceful pass with in some areas where they're like, well, my father, not my father, I don't have anything with going on with my dad, but like their parent, well, my parent, I finally got complete. I'll never be complete. Then they're complete. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like it's a whole thing about, and then they talk about it. It's a whole thing. So the point is that there is direct coaching. My cousin did the forum right before I quit, and it was part of why I quit. And what he told me, he left the forum. It was online. He said that a woman in his forum, um, was telling the instructor that she couldn't get complete with this man. The man had um, a restraining order against her. So even if she would write a letter, because the forum leader was, let's be unreasonable about this, you could write a letter, you could do something, and no, she could be arrested if she wrote him a letter and sent it to him, right?
Mhm.
And then they come back from the break. All these people are upset about it. They're like, you're coaching her to do something illegal. And then she's like, no, no, no. Then she says, no, I didn't do that. You guys all have it wrong. And that's when he bolted because it was like, if this lady's gaslighting everybody, she's full of it. And whether she realized she was doing that or not, it's always that theme that there's something incomplete over there that you are the source of in that relationship, and it has nothing to do with them, and anything can get complete. I'm sorry, I'm just sometimes when we're doing these episodes, I'm working out for myself what you're saying, and
Yeah.
I just thought that was super powerful what you just pointed to. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, I think the former guests have really covered kind of like the unworkability of the operations of the center, right? Like we're clear about that. So I'm going to fast forward to 2012. So my dad died in 2007. I was leading the self-expression and leadership program. I moved from California back to Austin. I was still leading. I led the introduction leaders program. I was leading the self-expression and leadership program. I was leading the thing to get us all complete with Landmark Education 2020. I mean, all those things, right? Leading, participating. And for the most part, loving it. And I was in a relationship. I got engaged. And then a month before my wedding, I called it off. And when I called that, there was nothing I wanted more in life than to be married and to be a mom. And when I broke off that relationship, it was like that future was gone. The future of being a wife was gone. The future of being a mom was gone. 2 weeks later, I got laid off from my job. So that was gone. I literally had to move out. And so I remember being in my friend's apartment and looking in the mirror and saying, you have no relationship, you have no children, you have no home, and you have no job. All you have is integrity.
Oh.
That's it. And that's enough, but that's where you are. But when I had to start dealing with the grief over that loss, all of the grief over losing my dad that I hadn't dealt with over those 7 years of participating and leading, like it just hit me like a tidal wave. Like it was just like, it almost took me out. And I kept trying to deal with grief from a place of transformation. Like, maybe I can just create a possibility around this. Maybe I can just be my word around it. Maybe I can just do more. Maybe I can just, work harder at work, because I was working. I actually did manage to cause a job in 2 weeks. So I was going in every day to work, working, still a program leader, still dealing with all of this, showing up to work, going home, and going to bed. And the thing was that was undoubtedly, to date, the lowest point of my entire life. And at that point, I had been participating for 23 years and leading for 22 of them. Wow. And nobody called me. Nobody from my program leader program called me. Nobody checked in to see if I was okay. Nobody checked in to see if I needed anything. And the people that got me through that, what I call dark night of the soul, were my mom, my best friend who was a graduate in Michigan, my best friend who was a graduate in California. And they showed up for me like over and over and over and over, because I had to, from nothing, create an entire life. And I just at that moment thought to myself, like, I have given you everything. I've given you everything. And I believe in a world that works for everyone with no one left out. Like, I really believe in that. But I don't have anything left to give. There's nothing left. I've given it all. And so I left. And I was like, I'm going to go see what's available on the outside. Now, it may sound like that was a very easy transition. I cried for a year, right? I've been gone 12 years, and there are still things that happen that hit my heart and they hurt, because I still believe in a world that works for everyone with no one left out, right? Okay, so that happened. So now I'm out. And now I'm like, Brian, how did I get here? Like, what actually happened? And I had to start to really look at, like, what are the things in existence in life that got me to this point, right? And I started to do the work around what are the systems of oppression in the United States that I was born into that had me arrive at this moment in time, because I am a product of them. And when you look at them, there are 4 systems of oppression that operate in the United States. There are probably more, but there's 4 big ones. One is white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism. And when you look at those 4 systems and how they interplay together in the intersection, those 4 systems combine to support and elevate cisgendered, hetero, white men of privilege. That's how it was put together, and that's who benefits. So anywhere those systems intersect, who is impacted are people of color, LGBT community, women, right? Like, that's how those systems come together. And I had to start to tell the truth about, I am a product of those systems, and I allowed things to happen and tolerated things and stepped over things that I should not have allowed to happen, tolerate, or step over. I did this, but I did it because I didn't know better. I was indoctrinated into these systems, and then it played out in Landmark's environment. Like, it was like just a firestorm waiting to happen, right? So you take a mission called A World That Works for Everyone with No One Left Out, and it's operating inside these 4 systems of oppression, And what you get is a world that doesn't work for everyone with no one left out. It only works for the people who are in power and the people that look like them. Right? And if you start to look at who are the people in power at the executive level, and you start to look at the actions that have come out and fallen out, it's clear that they're not unpacking or doing the work to deconstruct for themselves their own patriarchal, white supremacist, internalized, imperialist, and capitalist like framework that they were literally born into, right? So what you have is the people in power saying we're committed to this, and yet through the operations and the actions, it's actually doing harm because people are expecting that, but what they're getting is everything we've heard over the last 5 sessions. And so when you said, like, why did you come? And I'm like, because it's time for this conversation to happen, because it is time in 2024 for us to dismantle these systems. And it takes deep personal work to tell the truth about your own internalized racism, your own structures, your own things that you've done that don't work, right? Landmark is just like the perfect playground for all of that to get expressed. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does.
Yeah.
My therapist just, it's so funny because I'm in therapy and she's like, yeah, you know, I'm like, I was talking to her about the YouTube channel and I'm like, well, you know, like, am I just some disgruntled person? Is that why I'm doing it? Am I doing it for attention? And I'm like, and I feel like I told her, I feel like you guys, because she had done the S training like in the 70s. I said, I feel like you guys are giving Landmark a pass. You're giving them a pass. Like, oh, the whole world is in, you know, we're in a patriarchal system and blah, blah, blah. So Landmark is just part of the corporate machine, you know, because people comment about that. And her and I were having this discourse about it. And there was a couple things. And by the way, when I first started working with her, the first thing she did is say, read the book 1619. And she said, Brian, I just think that Landmark is a drop of the ocean. And she's been helping people exit Landmark and dealing with their abuse for decades. She goes, I believe it is a drop of the ocean to the whole real situation that we're in, which is what you're referring to, except I have done limited work in understanding all this. I don't have distinction in this. You know, when you're in one bubble for 70 hours a week, you're mastering and practicing that world. Similar to our other guests, when people are talking, one of the things I really love about doing this is, but I'm also really challenged by, is you're challenging me to think in new constructs, new distinctions, new ideas, new things that I have no depth of understanding in my own self so far.
Absolutely.
And so I just wanted to underline that with you as well, because what I believe you're saying is very clear. I have a question for you, because it sounds very theoretical. Sorry, I'm getting a little feedback somehow. It sounds very theoretical, like, oh yeah, we all live in, and by the way, in my Landmark world, I would say things like the patriarchy, you said colonialism, you said capitalism, and white supremacy, right? Those were the 4?
Capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, and colonialism. Yeah.
Okay, good. So you said those 4. In my opinion, in my Landmark, since, you know, this is my whole world, those I would call contexts, not actually real. Those are all made up in language. So how I would hear it, I'm just being honest about how when I hear these terms, but again, I'm working all the time and living inside of a certain bubble of language, I
Yeah.
wouldn't think those are bad things. What I would think is the answer is not deconstructing those things. The answer is for everybody to do landmark.
Yeah, and
As
that
a
is
place to
from that
address
is
that.
I'm
very
just
much
like that's kind of how it
yeah.
all works when you're on staff and you're in that world. I'm not saying that that's true or that's how I feel today. And so there's conversations. We had the chairperson of the seminar leader program. Landmark seminar leaders for years used to have a promise up until like a year ago to not do any other disciplines, which there was a big thing about, and which was that including reading. So reading any other materials that would be a conflict of Landmark's teachings, and
Course
people
in
were
Miracles, Artist Way, et cetera, right?
or whatever,
Yeah.
and
Or,
also anything that was in conflict. So you can imagine that people talk about control of information. So this was a big fight that went on because people were like, you can't tell me what I can read and what I can't read, you know? So why am I saying that? I'm just saying that because one of the criticisms of Landmark is with their leaders in these higher levels is like a control of information, either like representing things in the corporate questions and answers, like spinning things, and you just believe it because it's coming from Landmark, which is all about integrity. And
Mhm.
then there's this other thing about like this whole thing about other disciplines, other knowledge, other understandings, and you really kind of get those get spun for you as well. I mean, I was told for years, and I think it's fascinating. Because I don't think people believe this is true, but the forum leaders used to say all the time, and they would do it in front of people assisting. And this was not like this was common knowledge that people who sought out mental health professionals and went on medication, but people who went down that road were not being caused in the matter of their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
There's
one of the
the
people
disease.
that delivered the well-being policy
Yes,
that actually said, like, we recommend you not participate in this program at this time, and we'll give you a full refund of your money because we did not consider people on medication healthy, well, and successful. 100%.
correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you
Absolutely.
start talking about things like even which seems to have nothing to do with what does well-being have to do with patriarchy, but it's the similar phenomenon where when you're in that world and you're living that world,
Hmm.
um, you just and by the way, I've also been seeing you're sleep deprived too the whole time. You don't question those narratives.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the conversations for dismantling those societal systems. I mean, there's even papers we were given that most people talk about changing society. What we're about is a societal transformation. And
Right.
and there's papers about people, that everybody's trying to change the world and change systems and accountability. So you're very groomed in this mindset that really the only answer is transformation, and transformation means the forum, like giving up being right or wrong, getting out of a story, being cause the matter, being a person of integrity, and of course, enrolling all your friends and family. But
Yeah.
anyways,
And
so
the source person for those documents and that education and that forum is a straight white man. And that is the worldview that gives those documents, those distinctions, and that education. So, yes, of course, they would say we want societal transformation versus we want to deconstruct what is here that is already present that is not working.
yeah, and there's like I'm just listening to you say that, and there's like an arrogance from in that construct of Werner Erhard and his white privilege and him being a wealthy man and obtaining wealth and then holding on to that wealth and all of that and the power of going into corporations in the 80s and 90s and all that business. Um, but you can see that all is from like in his world, if you listen to him talk, he really thinks he gets it. Like he thinks he gets what it's like. He called it cultural humility. So, of the last several years, there's been a couple presentations. It's not been, in my opinion, it could have been done much deeper, but it was also done. But these conversations that I probably come from him about being cultural humility. But
Yeah.
you'd really have to deconstruct. What I'm just getting from you is you'd have to deconstruct and see yourself in a way of that privilege, or I don't mean to air quote it, I'm just trying to understand the distinctions. Like I would have to see myself as having that privilege and being a product of that society to be able to have the humility required to be able to truly deconstruct the whole thing, take responsibility for it, and be cause in the matter of the a different outcome, or all the actions needed to be taken to make a difference in society and in the world.
And yet, it does not matter how much you deconstruct, how much cause in the matter, how much responsibility you take. You will never have the lived experience of a person of color.
Correct.
And to try to operate as if that experience is the same is dangerous.
Mm. And
Okay.
Eric, do you relate to yourself as a person of color?
Well, I'm Hispanic, so I wouldn't say a person of. Gosh, this is really good for me because I wouldn't say a person of color, but I'd say like I'd always consider myself a minority, because I grew up being discriminated against as a minority for sure.
Right. So one of the ways, okay, so now we're going to get deep, right? And this is why I shared all those things in the beginning. And remember, like I've got the background of being in Detroit, and I've worked with all these people of color, and I've worked with these rainmakers who are just bringing in registrations all over the place. And I've like been mentored and trained in like what it is to cause transformation at the level of a community, right? So then I'm out, it's 2020, we have a pandemic, and then George Floyd is lynched on video, and the entire world saw it. And all that did was make public what's been happening forever and ever and ever.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like the truth finally got out in a way that people could no longer deny what Black people had been telling us forever and ever and ever, which was, you're killing us. And from there, sometime around that point, there arose this movement called Black Lives Matter, because we'd so clearly seen that Black lives didn't. Right? And then you started to hear more and more and more publicly in the news about different people who had died at the hands of the police, or who had died at the hands of their neighbor, or who had died, Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Eric Gardner, Ahmaud Arbery. Like we could go on and on and on, right?
Yeah.
So that movement was created as a stand for people to just start to wake up to that Black lives actually matter, right? And so I'm like, listening to podcasts, like really have been participating in like kind of anti-racism workshops and undoing white supremacy, and like just trying to learn for myself, like, what is it to be somebody who's really committed to justice? What is it to be committed to equity? As a white woman, privileged white woman, like what is it to deconstruct the reality that I grew up in? Because I did not grow up around people of color. I did not grow up around anybody that was not white. I mean, until I was 18 and went to college. I'm from Fort Worth, and I went to an all-white church, an all-white family, and an all-white school, right? So, I mean, there were like maybe one or two or three people, but there was never like interactions, So
Yeah.
then one day I'm sitting at my desk and I get an email, from the CEO of Landmark Education, and it's about the Black Lives Matter movement. And what it says is something like, and I will paraphrase here, but it's something like, Landmark Education, since its inception, has chosen not to align itself politically, and as such, you know, they basically like they weren't going to take a stand around the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was like, I'm not kidding you, it was like a knife in the heart. It was like a knife in the heart for all of those graduates and all those people that I loved in Detroit and in Atlanta and in Oakland and in San Francisco. And I just thought to myself, like, how tone deaf and how privileged and how could you? How dare you do that? How dare you do that to your rainmakers, to your leaders, to your graduates, to the people of color in your organization, because you're happy to take their money when they're producing registrations and leading your programs. How dare you? And that is actually why I wanted to come on this with the two of you, because that is an integrity issue at the level of the word of Landmark Forum leader. Because you cannot say we're committed to a world that works for everyone with no one left out and send out a tone deaf and privileged communication like that into the world at large and have it get all over the graduates. Because what that communication really said was we're committed to a world that works for everyone that looks like us.
Yeah.
And I am, you know, and in Landmark, we're trained not to bring a problem without a solution. So I'm got a committed complaint that the CEO and president of Landmark Education need to issue an apology to the graduates of color and all those that love them. And they need to issue an apology in the court of public opinion. And, you know, you guys were talking about the sunshine as a disinfectant or shining the light on things. Well, we're talking about dismantling these systems of oppression in the United States, but there are also systems that don't work. And one that doesn't work is that who's running the show at Landmark Education hasn't done the work to dismantle and deconstruct their own privilege. And that's where that communication came from.
Yeah. I remember receiving that communication in 2020. And I just remember it not landing with me. One, I think it was late. Everybody else had issued an announcement. Everybody, like, I changed my Facebook profile picture all black. Like, it just, like, the movement had, you know, people were like, hold on a second. Let me just, like, check myself over here and reevaluate where I'm at about this and where I've been, right? Mm-hmm. Like a big awakening for people. And then, like, weeks later, something like that, we got this communication from Landmark. And it was, yeah, like you said, the most tone deaf response. I remember reading it, like, thinking to myself, wait, what is this?
And not just that it was tone deaf, but that it comes from a company who says our vision is a world that works for everyone with no one left out.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It can't possibly be that, because that communication wasn't sourced from there. And I'll tell you, I worked for a software company where the CEO laid off 77 people. And she sent out an email. It was a tech company. She sent out an email. And in that email, the CEO talked about laying off 77 people, promoting somebody else. And by the way, happy Martin Luther King Day, with a quote by Martin Luther King. And the next day, she was on CNN getting called out for that communication as being insensitive. And she apologized. She cleaned it up. So I know it is possible at the level of a CEO to clean it up and make it right in the listening of the stakeholders, of the board, of the employees, of the graduates in our case. Like, it is possible to do that work. And that needs to be done.
Yeah. You know, Brian, I was just going to say, I know that Landmark's made attempts to do something about people of color. Like, I think they have now a forum for people of African descent. But I don't know. I've been so out of this conversation. I don't even know if that's landing for people.
Well, here's the thing, Eric. Having a forum for people of Black African descent is having a course for people who don't look like you. That is different from looking in the mirror and saying, I, Jennifer Clarke, am a product of the privilege of being white. And I was brought up in a white supremacist culture, and I actually am racist. And I am going to spend the rest of my life taking that apart and doing anti-racism work, because I really am committed to a world that works for everyone with no one left out. And what that looks like is unlearning all of the things I was indoctrinated into.
Yeah.
That's a different commitment, right?
Yeah, it
That's
is.
a
And
different,
learning. I mean, like I just share for myself, like I told you, one of my closest friends, she, she's a woman of color. Her grandfather was a slave. And
yes.
when I was on staff on the East Coast in New Jersey, and I spent a lot of time with her, and she shared with me so many things that I just had never, like, you read about this stuff, but to have somebody share it with you and to share what her experience was, to share that the KKK would go to her house and that her dad would have to grab the shotgun and like open the door and tell them to get off his property. I mean, just story after story hit that, unless I happen to be in a situation where, I was with someone who had experienced that growing up. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Like it really is learning and being willing to
Unlearning.
learn and unlearning. Yeah. Yeah.
And like part of that commitment. So after that communication came out, I was on this call with a bunch of graduates in Austin, and they actually, for whatever reason, hadn't gotten the email. And so they were asking, like, what are suggestions we can give to the executives at Landmark Education? And I said, they need a chief diversity officer from the marketplace who's a person of color, not a graduate that they promoted, but somebody who actually has worked in corporate America as a chief diversity officer, understands what it is to, be inclusive and create belonging, that understands how to do communications that are, inclusive, that are responsible, especially given what the mission is. But they need to hire that person, and then they need to listen to that person, and that person needs to be a Black person. In my opinion, that is just my opinion. That's number one. Number two, they need to issue that apology. And number three, they need to bring in trauma-informed people, because they have done harm. They need trauma-informed people coaching and mentoring their staff and their program leaders, because if they're not doing that work to dismantle and unpack all of those systems, they're doing harm. And that, when you're trauma-informed, that is the number first rule. Do no harm. I mean, it would have been so simple to say, our commitment is to a world that works for everyone with no one left out. As such, we stand with our graduates of color. Thank you for your service. Right? We're clear that your lives matter. Like, that would have been such a different communication. It would have been such a different landing. Now, granted, I'm not a CEO. I don't know what he has to be responsible for in the world.
Well, just the business, Landmark. I mean, I'm just assuming, right? But I think the only thing that Harry cares about is that they're not going to lose business out of this.
Well, I mean,
that's what a CEO
there's the intersection.
was.
There's the intersection of privilege and capitalism. Right? There's white supremacy and capitalism. I don't want to lose money over taking a stand for something that might have people leave.
And that's just my opinion, right? I don't know for sure if that's where he's standing, but the way it landed for me was a bunch of word salad, and but like you said, it didn't have to be this big thing.
It didn't, and it doesn't have to stay that way. Because here's the other piece of it, and this I didn't know, but this came up in one of your calls last week, right? So, with all of that said, you said that there's a Landmark Forum leader who's a person of color who said, I'm not a Black Landmark Forum leader. I'm a Landmark Forum leader who's Black. And that may very well be the case in Landmark education environments. But if you ask any person of color, what it is they deal with every day when they walk out the door. It is that they walk into a world that's made for white people, and they do not have the luxury of forgetting for 1 minute that they're a person of color. It could literally cost them their life. And so how that whole statement occurs to me is like subtle manipulation and gaslighting coming from a culture of people in leadership who don't have to deal with that same thing.
Yep.
You know, and I
Yep.
know that leader. I worked with that leader and I love that leader. And just to even hear that that person said that, I'm like, ooh, like, are you being talked into something that doesn't resonate with you, but you're doing it because they can't hear you? They really can't hear you, and they think they can. And look, man, I believe in the Landmark Forum leaders, and I believe in the sanctity and sacredness of the word of a Landmark Forum leader. Like, I do. I trust that. I think this is a blind spot. This is a blind spot in the organization that needs to get uncovered and dug into and dealt with and resolved committedly.
Mm-hmm.
You both look very solemn. This is a
No,
very
no.
difficult discussion, right? Like, this is
well,
a deep
I think,
one.
this is, you know, it's a different angle at what the organization does that doesn't work. It's another thing that the organization needs to be held to account for.
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about this. So I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling defensive, I think, because George Floyd was killed down just down from the street where I live, and besides September 11th, I think that was the most traumatic experience to go through, and it's with me every day. And whenever I think about him being killed and the way he was killed, it makes me cry. And that period of time in the middle of the pandemic, while I'm secretly closing the center, which I loved, the neighborhood where I live was literally, I just bought my place. And when I was signing my closing documents, this neighborhood where I'm at right now was all on fire. I'm bawling through my entire closing. It was supposed to be this exciting day in my white privileged existence. I finally owned a home, and in the neighborhood by the park, which so I was like, the whole thing was so much, and I'm all by myself too. I'm pretty much spending time. My friend lives down the street from me. But besides that, I'm like by myself. You can't see family, friends. You don't want to get people COVID. It was like insane, right? And I spoke with one of the executives about it because I was freaking out. Like it was felt like we were in Armageddon. There was just the National Guard is on your block. Neighbors are going up and down guarding everything. People are rioting and looting. The Apple store is broken. Every little thing everywhere is just destroyed, right? And I'm okay with that. Everybody who lived here is okay with that. Crime has gone up in our neighborhood. I mean, we don't like it. It's a little scary, but we don't want the police here. And people talk about cities and they go, oh, they're, whatever, super liberal. It's not like that. It's just like when you get that this was happening and I was like riding my bike and running and living in white land while this was happening over there in my neighborhood, and I didn't even see it. It took George Floyd being killed like that to be able to see it, you know? And we had tons of conversations at Landmark about this, tons. And I thought, and I do know that Harry They sent that message and it didn't land. I know he did send some kind of retraction or apology after that, which was much more in depth. I just don't have any of that. But it was but the whole thing was a big mess. I mean, because what you're pointing to, whatever, but we're all in a different world than what it is to be a
Yeah,
black
but it is. But
man in the
even just
world.
for me, like even though I grew up, even though I'm Hispanic, I grew up in a very like white community, and so yeah, I had Hispanic friends and stuff like that, but predominantly in the neighborhoods that I was in, there's a lot of white people in those neighborhoods, and so you know, for me, there was always that constant battle. It was like, well, how come you're not more white, or how come you're not more Mexican? Like you don't really fit the mold of either of the two. And it was always like this battle for me, like depending on what crew or what group that I was hanging out with, would mean how I was going to act or interact with that group. And because if I was hanging out with my white friends, like there were certain ways that I couldn't be or do, and so it's this whole like you've said it before, Brian. Like the system is sick. I had a center manager who would literally tell me that I was not Hispanic. I was white. I just was born Hispanic. And she would interact with me in that way because she's super racist. And I'll never forget that was the thing, that's how it was treated. And I think because of that, I progressed through the organization early on in my staff career because of that.
So I'm actually interested, Eric, like, do you identify as Hispanic? Do you identify as Latin? Is there a particular country that you are like, that's your culture? Because I don't know.
Yeah, I identify as Mexican. I say Hispanic just because I think it captures a bigger audience, but definitely Mexican. My wife is as white as it gets,
Do
and
you speak Spanish?
I speak Spanish. I'm teaching my daughter to speak Spanish. So we at home she speaks Spanish with me, and she speaks English with my wife. It's really important for me that she learns to speak Spanish at home. We were only allowed to.
Were you born
I
in
was
the
born.
United States?
I was at home. I was only allowed to speak Spanish, and so we would speak Spanish at home, and it's really interesting for me because whenever like we're going to Mexico this weekend, and when I'm speaking Spanish, you would never know that I speak English, and in my brain, I think in Spanish when I'm speaking Spanish. It's the weirdest thing. And then when I'm speaking English, you would never know that I could speak Spanish so fluently, and I think English. So it's so.
My partner says the same thing. He's Puerto Rican Filipino, and he speaks Spanish, English, and Vietnamese. And he
Oh my
said
goodness.
he has different personalities in each language.
It
Like
really
each,
is like
each
Spanish
language
is
gives
just
him a
like
different way of being.
Spanish is such an expressive language, and so when I'm in Mexico, I'm like, hey, it's just very different.
And Brian, you said something about like that what happened to George Floyd would never happen to you as a white man, but that doesn't minimize that underrepresentation is underrepresentation, right? So
Yeah,
I was talking to this very dear friend of mine. She's this lovely Dominican woman, and she was buying a house. She's like, oh, it's got like this bedroom and this bedroom. And I'm like, oh, the master bedroom. And she was like, Jennifer, she's like, we don't say that anymore. And I was like, oh. And she said, yeah, I thought like, given kind of your commitment, you would appreciate being told that. I'm like, oh, I really appreciate being told that because I never thought of that before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really a thing. I work in real estate myself, and I have to constantly catch myself. Like this is the primary, this primary bedroom. And I've shown property in San Diego. There's certain parts of San Diego and in Santa Barbara, but San Diego specifically, where they had the maids' quarters that had a separate staircase leading upstairs to their bedrooms and stuff like that. And, you know, I've shown these properties before because they were built like so long ago. It's these old houses. And it's so weird walking in those houses because a lot of these houses are like trust sales where they haven't even been remodeled. They're like in pretty much original condition. And it's kind of eerie. You walk in, like I remember walking into the house and they still had the kitchen with the flaps that open, you know, and it was like its own completely space. And the help had their own separate entrance with their own separate staircase. And those are just the times that we lived in. And you have to be super mindful when you speak, like, you know, what it is, like just something as simple as like it's not the master bedroom, it's just the primary.
So what you're saying, Jennifer and Eric, thank you. Just in my recent up until I left in November, there was some work on this, but there was several incidences. I was getting continual complaints from leaders who were attending big 300-person Zoom workshops about the people leading it. They're all white men over 60, and different comments that be made, complaints about sexism, racism, um, uh, um, with the deaf community. I talked about that one. And what really got me about it was that when I took it to those people, they were offended, like hurt, like I can't win with people or something. And yet, and I understand that dissonance, that cognitive dissonance or whatever, people don't see themselves, but after 2 3 years and all the work we were supposedly doing, you could see the people at the top were not really doing it, because the reaction should have been like, oh yeah, what was I thinking having this entire day being led by 4 white men over 60? They should have been like, oh my gosh, I'm going to issue an apology to everybody. Like, that's what I mean. That would be the lowest level. It should have occurred to them never to do it at all if they were doing the work.
Or
They were
sometimes you just have to address it. Like, look, we're committed to a world that works for everyone. And today this is going to be led by 4 white men over 60. This
but
is who's available.
that would
Right?
have had them it occur for them,
Right.
and it didn't
Right.
occur.
Yeah,
And the fact that
it's
it
just
didn't
this whole
occur,
thing.
and then it occurs, but that's all these complaints. See, part of the landmark experience is that, similar to your complaint about the boards that didn't work, all things when you bring issues, including this, how they go in that listening of those people when you take a complaint up, is they hear it all the same. They
Yes.
hear the unworkability with the boards, to the oh, there's 4 white men. They hear all of that exactly
And
the
they
same.
address it exactly the same.
And that is, so
It,
here's
it's
like
not
the
like it's valid. It's not like it's a separate issue. It's all the same. It's just a little different.
To say I'm going through a space of indoctrination in this work, and I've been asked to relinquish my queer identity because that's not who I really am. I'm really nothing, and I'm the Word, and I'm the Word as seminar leader, and I have to relinquish that for my designation, which to me is indoctrination. But to raise up those issues, they all just get filtered in the same way. And I
Yes.
believe how they hear all this is there's just so many issues that you can't address everybody's issues. There's just all these people have all these different issues, and there's a heart to the matter. And what you're pointing to, which is what my therapist is pointing to me to, is that the heart of the matter goes way beyond landmark. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, because there are the 4 systems that exist. But this is where the whole healing piece comes in, is that the time is now. And we're the generation. Like, it ends with us, right? Like, it ends with us. Like, this conversation that we're having is really bringing to light, and has been bringing to light, thank you, Brian, all of the things that have been happening historically that don't work. And this is the first time we're talking publicly on social media about it. We, the people
Yes.
who did it, we, the people who were there, we, the people who were bought in. You know, we are bringing to light the things and the systems that don't work. And that is where healing starts, is just to tell the truth about it, right? And one of the best things I learned, and one of the most uncomfortable things I learned on this kind of journey, this healing journey, is that if a Black person tells you something is racist, you should just believe them because they are the expert. If a woman tells you something is sexist, you should just believe her because she's the expert. If a gay person tells you something is homophobic, just believe them. They know, they are the expert. Like, you know, versus like defending, how about just like, a gay person just told me I was homophobic. Maybe I should look at that. You know, like we're the ones that are like committed to being cause in the matter and responsible. We can look at that. We're big people.
Yeah.
We can look at something, we can see if it did harm, we can clean it up, and we can move on down the road, and we can learn from that.
And I think the biggest thing, Jennifer, kind of what you're pointing to, is given who Landmark claims, or who Landmark says they are, and given who Landmark says they're about, and the difference they're committed to making in the world and with communities and such, that it's so inconsistent to not address something that's so big in this country.
Well, it's more than that. Okay, so that's part of it, but there's also this thing about the word of Landmark Forum Leader is sacred. Without the word of Landmark Forum Leader doesn't exist, and the razor's edge of integrity that they walk is very fine. Right? Like they are held to account for who they are, is their word, similar to designated seminar leader, but I would imagine at a different level. So to be a Landmark Forum Leader and to not be dealing with dismantling their own constructs of who they are because of the systems that they were born into, because you can say, who I am is a Landmark Forum Leader. Yes, but you are still a product of everything that informed you to get there. And if you haven't really done the conscious work to turn the light inward and look at all that and pull all that apart, that is still going to show up unless you're really clear what that is and you can be responsible for it. So I think we just have like this massive blind spot of white privilege that hasn't been dealt with integrity.
Yeah.
Right. It's not wrong that they're that way. It's not wrong that I'm that way. That's how we started. That's where we started from. But the time is now to tell the truth about that and to start to really look at what is it really going to take to have a world that works. I mean, it's going to take a lot. It's not going to happen in my generation. Like we're going to have to redo the justice system and the education system and the legal system and the cultural conversations that we're all in and everything that's in the out there, that's in the in-between that is us, right? Like all of that has to get redone.
Correct.
But it starts with us, right? Like, and it ends with us. Like I am really committed that like it ends with us. Like I am not taking this forward.
Right.
You know, I don't have children, but I do have a niece and nephew, and I am committed that they are not going to have to do the work that I've had to do because they are going to be able to start from where I ended.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
I think it's just so powerful. And, you know, when I did the interview with Aaron Smith Levin, you know, there were comments going through like, this guy is still indoctrinated. And they're like, so I have people at Landmark like, what are you doing? And I have these other people who are not from Landmark. They're like, oh, he just loves Landmark. Ann told me, he's like, they could get you back. You love Landmark. And I do. I realize that a big part of what I've been going through is grief. It feels like a divorce for me. It's been enormously painful, and yet, so it's just really fascinating what you're bringing up, Jennifer. Because
such a good call.
Well, because what you're speaking to is the why. The why I am, why I got off it, worked all those hours, did turned myself inside and out. And it is to have a world that works for everyone. And that very much, by the way, Landmark has read Martin Luther King. They have used the civil rights movement over and over and over again to inspire people. The Highland Park Michigan forums was in the videos of the advanced course. So I get what you're saying, to not be like, no, we thank you for your service and we've got you, and we're not, like, hello. And I don't think that. I think it's a massive blind spot. I think what you're saying is correct, but it's beyond Landmark. It's like every person who is listening or watching this show is like, there is we are, most people who are in who got into this deep really do believe that they can make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I know Eric feels this way, and I know Ann feels this way, that what we're doing is making a difference. Like by speaking up about all this stuff, it makes a
Yeah,
difference.
it
And
Yeah.
does. And
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 I
every single episode we have, there's a new person that reaches out to me or Brian who says, "Oh my gosh, that last conversation reminded me of, such and such instant, and it really brought healing to me for something that I've had no idea I needed to heal, or something that I've been trying to heal." And I'm sure it'll be the same with this specific episode as well.
Oh, for sure. And I believe but that's why I think, when we were talking earlier about loving the graduates and everything, I think that's why we all still get along, why we all are still, even on social media, even the worst, we were talking about comments, even the worst comments that come out of the Landmark people are the nicest, most responsible comments. If you look at any other people, all the political people fighting with each other, and I'm telling you, those Scientology people are not nice about nothing. So I mean, I saw what they had to say. So
Yeah.
it's like there's underneath it all. This is why I'm conflicted at this point in my journey of all of this, which is simply that we posted these are how Landmark could change. I absolutely think there is a place for transformation, but acknowledging the past, even the exploitation of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's huge to believe you're on this purpose, and then to see that Warner was making all this money. I don't think I would even had an issue with it if that wasn't I had not been led to believe something different.
Right.
And and the same thing with the mission of the power and magic of transformation being alive and real for all people. I have watched systematically choices be made over and over and over again to not do that, to not go into communities, to not make offerings, it's very much like, and by the way, that Detroit Center, by the time 2020 came, before it closed, was all staffed by white people. There still were black people assisting, but they had raised the tuition to one of the highest in the country. Now, that was supposedly to afford the location in some suburb that they had moved into, but it was almost unaffordable for people who are in a minority, underprivileged, and that the fact that anybody would even consider to do that is part of the privilege you're referring to.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, it's just a very powerful thing to point to, not just point out, but to hold people to account to. When I was a seminar leader, we were trained that our job was to hold the graduates. This is like when you're leading to more senior ones, to hold them to account to being a graduate. And that's what I hear your communication is, to be
Mm-hmm.
the kind of person who speaks up, to be the kind of person who operates with integrity, to be the kind of
Yeah.
person who draws a line of demarcation.
Well, and to tell the truth, that just because you've attained this title or wherever you are in the company, like there's further east to go. Like there's more for you to learn. There's like this whole life, this whole journey of healing is an unlearning process, right? And I saw this really great quote, and I almost sent it to you, Brian, but it actually says that like the person you became to survive the war, you can't take that person with you. Like you have to let that person go to let the
That's
new
really
person
good.
come forward, because that person was designed for the war, right? You
Yeah,
have to,
that's so
and
good.
I read that and I was like, part of it was like, I was really struck by it. And part of it made me really sad because I love that person that got me through. But that person
Yeah.
isn't a match for this future called like healing.
Yeah.
Healing, right? Like we are healing. And that in and of itself is transformational. And if, if I ran the world, I would say, Landmark, maybe it's, maybe the focus is not just transformation, like a new realm of possibility, but actually like a healing realm where we start to tell the truth about things and really work at a deep level on letting people show up in their best expression of self, however that looks. And we have the space to hold that and witness that and hear that and honor that,
Well, it's very powerful. I had people keep saying this word healing, and it's really been bothering me. I was upset that people would work and be leaders at Landmark, and that what they all say to me, the ones who've left, many, I mean, the ones who've talked to me, but I've just heard it repeatedly over and over again, is it took me several years of healing work. And these are often people who completed powerfully or successfully, whatever you want to put that, right? With honor, all that crap.
With honor, yeah.
And they, but when I started talking to you about this, Jennifer, and I'm obviously in therapy, and my therapist says that she thinks that this whole thing that's going down with Anne in the book, and she said she just sees it as like maybe a collective healing is happening from all
it's
this
time.
pain that's been building up. But I'm just starting to see this word or this term healing in a new way. Like it's shifted for me from being black and white to technicolor. Like I am starting to want to take it on, and I had not seen that like that before. And I really thank you for bringing that up, because that's another term. As much as when you talk about the patriarchy, capitalism, I don't know anything. I didn't even listen to a podcast till after I left staff. I had never listened to a podcast. I mean, I am like become like, I know everybody else did it like the whole pandemic, but I did not. I think I've heard a book on tape before, but like I mean, like I was
On
on
tape.
staff. I don't know how to describe this to people. Or what book on, yeah, a book on tape, right? No, book
Is it
on
an 8-track or
On Audible.
cassette on Audible. I got Audible recently because I learned. Oh, I could. Everybody's like, you got to read this book, and I'm like, I gotta go work out and do other things. So I learned you can do chores and stuff, and like listen to books. It's fabulous, right? So I really don't have a lot of distinction, quote unquote, in what you're speaking to. None of it. I mean, when you talk about capitalism, I don't know anything about capitalism. I saw Hamilton. That's about as much as I know about capitalism.
That's actually probably all you need to know about capitalism right there.
Okay, good. Well,
there it
that's
is.
so I did
Hamilton was
that.
great. I love Hamilton.
White supremacy. I read, white fragility, and I saw the 13th. Like, and these are things that matter to me. But it's what I'm trying to say is that part of the breakdown that's happening with the possibility of a world that works for everybody and this transformational work really make a difference is it just still all leads me to that there's no way in that system of Landmark that there's even time for people to really look and do that, the work of, and It's just you're right. It is an idea whose time has come.
Look, if they
Yes.
can spend the time to uncollapse enrollment and registration, they can take the time to identify
They
their
can.
own racist
Well,
tendencies.
They
I
do
mean,
an hour and a half all staff call once a week. I mean, you could literally do an hour and a half call once a week
they
with
can
the
create a
staff.
document. They can create a document called the inquiry is, how was I racist today? The inquiry is, what microaggression did I notice? The inquiry is,
Well,
I
and
mean,
you know what? There's just, I could tell you because I have friends of mine who work at these big corporations, Salesforce, who are, teachers, and they spend time on this stuff
they do.
and they share it with me. So I know that if a big corporation like that can do it, Landmark can do it.
And
Yeah.
especially a global corporation, right? Like,
Yeah.
because this is, I mean, we Americans don't have a great reputation abroad, right? Like all of this, is how we're
Mhm.
known, and it's not flattering, and so I really do feel like when you talk about like an idea whose time has come, like we are healing and we are taking apart the systems that don't work wherever we find them. And
Mm.
and Landmark they could turn it around. Like they really could. Like it wouldn't be hard. They just need to get some experts in there. They need to have some guided conversations probably. I mean, they've got all of the how. They just need to get the what. They need the content, right? But they've
Yeah.
been so
Mhm.
insular for so long, and the source has been the same source for so long. It's just created what it's created, right?
Yeah, and
Mhm.
I love what you're saying because I am seeing that kind of masculine energy, authoritarian, like putting people on warnings, you're going to lose your job, you're fired, like you'll be fired if you don't do X, Y, and Z is Landmark. I mean,
Mhm.
I spent, you spend your whole life trying not to get fired or, like hoping you will at times, but like living in this fear of loss. Um,
Mhm.
but why I'm saying that is that, what I find so fascinating as because a big part of me, I started to realize when when I was doing a training on sales and marketing for my new job, I started to realize that the statistic is like 78% of people research something before they'll interact with you. And I cannot tell you how much in the last, especially in the last like 5, 6, 7 years, how many people, well, I almost lost my relationship over Google, people Googling Landmark and cult showing up.
Mhm.
I went out and I met Tim and we were like really great. And he's like, what is this? Because I just told him where I worked. I didn't tell anything about it or anything. He was just checking it out. Oh, because I was all like, oh, it's amazing, blah, blah, blah. So he's just checking it out and it just fills in cult. And I'm thinking, this is what Seb talked about it. He Googled it right there when he was at the evening. This is what people do. So I made that piece. But then when you bring up all the magical people and the rainmakers and all the different diversity of people in the heart and the communities of people that have fed this Landmark machine, and you can also see Landmark's enrollment and participation dwindling over the years in this country. And I think it's all this incompletion, whatever you want to call it, like all, and that, so that system, which I already know I think is unhealthy. I think it's a high control situation, which also is authoritarian. So that's got to go with the patriarchy or one of these things I don't know. But that fits in there, that you're fired kind of,
Mhm.
I'm the boss, you listen to me, everything. So the point is that I don't know. I don't have anything insightful to say, except I can see that the possibility of all of what we're doing has much bigger implications than just being on it with Landmark and even even as, and I am hurt and disgusted and upset about Werner Erhard and his physical abuse of people, and that is which is what Anne's book is about. And those allegations have been running for 50 years, and they keep coming, and people don't even, and all of that. But that's all part of that system. people say it all the time. They justify it. They go, "Oh yeah, all these leaders
Well,
were all
then that he's gotten
awful."
away with it for so long. It's all part, kind of just now. I'm like, wait a minute, all of this is intertwined in everything that Jennifer literally said to us. Like, it's literally an example of someone who's literally gotten away with it for 50 years because of those 4 things that Jennifer talked about when we first started this call.
Yeah, so
And
I'm
if there's
starting.
anything to be learned by the R. Kelly documentary, it is that nobody gets away with it by themselves. They have
Wow.
to have
Yeah, a
a
whole
community of
apparatus.
people around. There's a whole machine working to keep it going. And
Yeah.
I was part of that machine. I stepped over things and kept quiet about things that I knew didn't work.
Mm.
Yeah.
They called it
I
in
see it.
one of the interviews that Ann did. They called it weaponizing empaths.
Yeah.
Getting empathetic people who see deeply on your side and then weaponizing them, and they don't realize they're weaponized. I thought that was a huge. Again, I can't super articulate it because I don't have a PhD in that, but it was amazing to hear that term. I was very
That
much.
just sounds terrifying.
Yeah. Well, it's like that's how these loving people could end up working for 25 years in the Church of Scientology thinking they're doing something good, or Nexium, and I don't hold Landmark at that level of I don't find going through the curriculum for living to be damaging like that kind of stuff has led to people. But I don't know if Scientology's general courses are that way. I don't know. But all I know is that what I'm getting from this conversation, which I'm super thankful that you insisted we have, is that these conversations that we're having actually are in a much bigger conversation or a much
Yeah.
bigger reality of the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm
And I have
go
one more
ahead.
thing to say. Like, I
Yeah,
know
go
we're
right
coming
ahead.
up on a couple of hours, but I do have something else. Well, actually, I have 2 more things to say.
Yeah, go right ahead.
And the first one is, if you are, I'm going to cry, of course. If you are watching this and you are a graduate of color, I want you to know that I see you
Mm,
and I love you,
mm,
and your life matters.
mm,
It matters to me and it matters in the world. It matters. Your life matters. And just on a personal level, my partner is biracial. He is Puerto Rican Filipino. And I got really clear for myself that I would not be going back, participating, promoting, giving money to, or sharing about Landmark Education and the Landmark Forum until this thing gets cleaned up, because he is the most precious person in my life and his life matters to me.
mm.
And I'm not going to take him into an environment that doesn't afford him the same listening and rights and privileges that I have.
Yeah.
That would be an integrity issue for me. And so I, from the bottom of my heart, want them to fix this. I want them to apologize and clean it up in the court of public opinion.
I love it. We just keep adding things to our things Landmark needs to change, and this is a huge one. So thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. 100%.
I'm super thankful you created tonight. I'm very moved by this whole conversation.
Me
And
too.
and
This
I
like
am
opened up this conversation, made it this like it's so much bigger than anything Brian and I are doing.
Because at
well,
the heart of it, this is episode, when Brian said, "What should we call your episode?" And I'm like, "You should call it a love letter to the graduates." Because that's what's at the heart of Landmark Education. It's about the graduates.
Mm-hmm.
Because the work can be the work, but without graduates, it doesn't live in the world.
well, that's what we'll call it then.
A love letter to the graduates. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hashtag Black Lives Matter. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I thank you for this. This was more than just this conversation for me. You gave me a whole new possibility for seeing even what this healing all can be in service of, and what this breakdown amongst the graduates and all that is really it just leads to such something that my life really is about, which is about, as you said, having the world work. Eric, anything you want to say to close?
No, just so good. Thanks, Jennifer.
And I do want to say, like, and for the three of us, right? I think it's incumbent upon the three of us, because we're the ones here in this conversation, that if people want to talk about healing from whatever they've been through, I'm happy to talk to somebody, because I'm 12 years out. Okay. It's been 12 years for me. And I'm still find myself sometimes caught off guard. You know, like there was a graduate event here in Austin and I didn't go, you know, because like I am not putting myself in places to forward that in the world until this gets cleaned up, you know?
Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
And by the way, thank you. I was moved by what you said in all of this. And I also thank all of our graduates in the Black community and your stand and everything. It's always moved me. And I'm committed to doing this work. So I just thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, we will we'll see everybody July 9th. If you like this video, please like it, please subscribe and
Comment,
so on.
subscribe.
Comment, and then Tuesday, July 9th, we will be here with Ann Peterson and Jennifer. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I love you.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Bye.